instead of just running on to help somebody when you see they need help, you had to first stop and think, okay, is it safe for me to put my foot on the stage? Because maybe the lifts would move and I'll fall into a hole. When I actually got there, I realized all my little worries about, how should I dress? Or is it appropriate to shake the guy's hand if he picks me up from the airport? In general, as a physio, you could actually do a lot of things. There are some physios that sit in an office and do paperwork for insurance companies, and they don't have to see anybody or talk to anybody all day.
And my name is Ana Aguilera. Today we're talking to Jacinta Wu about all things physiotherapy.
Jacinta followed her passion for biology, the human body, and working with people to complete a Bachelor of Physiotherapy honours at the University of Melbourne. Her work in major hospitals in Australia prepared her to be an in-house physio and first responder for the House of Dancing Water Show in Macau. Jacinta holds numerous certificates and accreditations in sports injury management, pre-hospital trauma life support, acupuncture, fitness, pilates, and yoga. Jacinta was also the head of physiotherapy on the Terhal Show by the Ministry of Culture in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, created by Dragone and managed by an events company, Hwadi. Jacinta knows what it's like to be a physiotherapist for elite athletes and performing artists and how treating and managing them differs from a standard physio practice. Jacinta, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Anna. I'm very pleased to be here with you today.
Awesome. So I want to start with, why did you choose physiotherapy to begin with, and what was the path that led you there?
To be honest, I think physio chose me because I was always interested in biology and the human body in general when I was in high school. So I knew I always wanted to do something related to medicine, health sciences, and, anything to do with the body and humans. So at the time, when I was doing my exams for university, if you wanted to get into anything medical, you had to do another test called the UMAT test. And that test was actually, U stood for undergraduate, UMAT, undergraduate medicine and health sciences admission test. So that test was required for Australian and New Zealand students wanting to go into anything medical, and that kind of screened them to see, are these people appropriate to become the future doctors, nurses, physios, speech therapists, you name it. And that test was a paper-based test, and we had to do, clinical reasoning stuff. We had to do logical, critical thinking questions, but then it also had fairly open questions that tested your ability to communicate and how much empathy you had. So it really tested out each person's personality, and it would tell you at the end of it, what sort of medical profession were you more suited towards. And for me, physio came out first. So I kind of went with it and chose physio.
And were you based in Australia at the time? Because I know you're from Macau, right? Were you doing that test from Macau, or were you based in Australia at that time?
Oh, no. I'd already been in Australia for 3 years before starting university. So, I went into the regular VCE examinations, Victoria Certificate of Examination. So the normal, usual path locals take to go to uni. So that was how I started my uni life in Melbourne in Australia. But I was originally, born in Macau, but raised in New Zealand a bit, and then back to Macau for a bit, and then to Australia.
And then how do you end up working with performers?
So again, I kind of, life kind of put me into it, really. I was never really super passionate about sports or performances per se, and I never really went for that direction. After I graduated my degree, I worked in Australia for 3 years in major hospitals just to get some experience and do an all-rounded kind of work around different wards, making sure that, I was in the right profession, doing what I really wanted to. But there came a point in time where I was 10 years away from home and, talked to mom back home in Macau, and she was like, oh, you've been away for 10 years, don't you think it's time for you to spend some time with us? We're getting old, give Macau a try. So, I thought, well, with 3 years of experience under my belt, in Australia, maybe I can go back to Macau and see what jobs I can score, right? So I eventually, left Australia, went back to Macau in 2009, and just pretty much started job seeking. And I knew for a fact that I didn't want to work in a local hospital if I had the choice, because everything here is in Chinese or Portuguese. Mainly, like investigations, the reports would come out in Chinese. I can read and write Chinese, but at the same time, my training was done in English. So I wouldn't know the name of the muscles in Chinese. I wouldn't know syndromes, the actual, medical jargon per se in my own language, funnily enough. So I thought, well, maybe I would do well in a broad public sector. So I was kind of zoning in on the more private jobs, and I just stumbled across the job. City of Dreams advertised, and they really wanted a physio with Western experience that had a good command of English, doesn't mind to work in a high stress environment. So the job description was kind of very, very broad, looking for certain qualities, but because the show was not made yet, so there was no job to actually put the role to. So I didn't know that I was going to work in such a large scale show directed by the late Franco Dragone. And, I was very, very impressed by this whole journey into it, and very, very grateful for just kind of stumbling into it.
And what was surprising about the transition from, working in hospitals or a clinical practice then into the performing arts world? So what surprised you and what was different about it from a physio perspective?
Well, first of all, when you work for a show, it's a whole different environment. When I used to work for hospitals, you had a whole medical team around you, and it was a hospital setting, and you had everything you needed on hand. But in a theatre, physio was only a small department, and whatever you needed, you had to pre-think about and already have it stocked and ready to go, whether it be an emergency equipment or whether it be some bandages or tapes or whatnot. So the forward planning, the everything, would have to be much more prepared than if you worked in a hospital. You just walk in and everything's there. Everyone's there. If you needed help, you just page a nurse, page a doctor, call the registrar. Oh, somebody has some problem, and it's out of my hands because it's a medical problem. You always had help. But in the circus or the theatre environment, the physios in the show, in the House of Dancing Water show, were the only medical personnel. So whether we liked it or not, we had to be prepared to answer questions, to refer on outside and help them source the specialists that the artists might need. And, the process would take a lot longer. And when we're dealing with high risk acts like flying motorbikes, people diving from 25 meters, we also had to be very prepared to know that in case there was a major accident, we would have to be the first responders, perform resuscitation, CPR if needed, because it wasn't like the hospital where there was a nurse like within 5 meters of you always, and then you could page the crash team and say, okay, there's a code, we need someone to come, and then they'll come running, and then I just step back. So in a show, we were pretty much it. But the company prepared us well, sent us to do this pre-hospital trauma life support course. So we were very well geared up for it, and only those that passed the test could actually do the job, right? So yeah, that was one of the major things for me. Like, that was different between hospitals. And another thing with shows was that we were needing to navigate the stage space. So instead of just running on to help somebody when you see they need help, you had to first stop and think, okay, is it safe for me to put my foot on the stage? Because maybe the lifts would move and I'll fall into a hole while I'm running there, or maybe something will fall on me from above because, winches are still going. So a performer or a thing could fall on you while you're trying to do an emergency response. So everything in the theatre was quite new for me, but very important to learn. And again, it was a big, steep learning curve, but I understood why it was important for me, for everybody, for the good of the show. And so communication was very important. And, that was one of the big things they highlighted in the job description. This person has to be able to communicate well, communicate efficiently and quickly and properly. So, it came out during the job that I knew why it was important. You always had to think. You always had to think before you act, like with anything, but with this job in particular, because it could be life-threatening for myself or for someone else if I made the wrong move.
Make it sound so intimidating.
Well, it was a huge challenge, and for someone my age at the time, I thought it was so super fun and so super cool because it was the biggest show of its kind that I never knew of or anyone ever knew of that was actually being made. So we were in the creative process, not knowing what to expect, not knowing how the end result would turn out. Everyone was working together, supporting each other to make this thing happen. So it was a very good atmosphere to work in because it was like one big family trying to work towards a common goal, and people worked very hard together to put this major, big, spectacular show in Asia on. And, at the end, everyone was wowed by it. My relatives, in the beginning, they're like, oh, you come back from Australia. What job are you taking? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I work for a casino. They're like, a casino? Shouldn't you be working for a clinic? And it's like, well, I don't know. They wanted a physio, so there I am. Let's see. And then, in the end, the show just blew them away, and they were like, wow, So, I'm very proud to be on that show or have been on that show.
It must be very cool as a machinist to have been part of it.
Yes, very much so, yeah. There was no expectation, and I guess that's the best surprise you get when you go into something without much expectation.
So in that show, there was performers from all over the world, and I can imagine there'd be a lot of different personalities and different people that you'd have to manage. What would be some advice you would give people who are going to work with different cultures and within a multicultural team?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say always keep an open mind. Don't judge people before you actually get to know them, as a general rule. Because like I said, if you walk in with expectations, sometimes, it might not be what you expected. And sometimes people might be the opposite of who you think they are or what their culture holds. Be respectful at all times. Be interested in people's culture. I often found that, people who were interested in my culture brought me more joy, more fun to work with because, they truly showed interest as a person to integrate into my culture, like say when they were working in Macau. So people who actually tried to speak the local language or even tried to greet, security guards or cleaners or work friends in a different language. I always thought that bonding was a bit more stronger, and there was always more fun and more how would you say, community kind of, when you work with people who are diverse, and accepting of all cultures.
Was there any trends with like different cultures who like would not show up in your physio room versus who would, in terms of, is there people that would always be there, or is that a personality thing? Was it a cultural thing or an individual thing in terms of people, how much they'd show up on your bed, physio bed?
I think it's more an individual thing because sometimes
I'm
artists
baiting you.
Well, sometimes artists would be more avoidant of coming into physio because they think, oh, that's going to affect my contract. If I'm always known to be injured, I feel like they don't want us to know that they're injured, and they try to help themselves and rehab themselves. So there are some artists that are more reserved and more cautious, that they tend to self-manage, which is no problem. But we always keep a tab on, who's in and who's out of what. Why are they out? Why are they in? And if someone's injured and come in and say, okay, I can't do that particular act, we would ask why. Where did you hurt yourself? When did you hurt yourself? And assess them to see whether they actually needed our help. So for some people, even if they didn't want our help, and we thought they did, we'd force them to come in and put their name on the board and say, you have to come see us. But then there were some other people who were more careful at looking after themselves and didn't really care what we thought about them, because they would be like, well, if I'm coming to physio, even if I'm coming for treatment every day, I'm doing it for personal maintenance. But as long as I'm doing the show, as long as I'm in every act, if I'm showing that I'm a good performer, that shouldn't matter whether or not they grant me the next contract or not. So those more confident performers who didn't really care about what we thought. They would just come in, put their name on the board whenever they needed. And, there'd be people that we see regularly, especially in between shows. That would be the most popular time because they were there anyway and everyone wanted to come at that time. So they were fighting for the spots every time the board opens available for sign up. People would always be there looking for those spots first. And the spots that people didn't want were the early morning spots before show call because they didn't want to get up early, come in for treatment and then hang around for 5 hours before they were actually needed for their jobs. Yeah.
I've always found it interesting, and I don't know how you guys make a call, because like you have a medical training, you also listen and tend to the artists, but you also have the pressure from the show integrity, right, to keep everyone in. And like, how do you guys find that balance between keeping everyone in or respecting when someone needs to be out and, pushing all the lines?
That's a little bit of a challenge for us, for sure, because, sometimes if you saw this same person in private practice, let's say, for example, a simple sprained ankle, if you saw that person in private practice and they worked in an office, you would just say, don't run on an ankle for a while. You'd give them a time frame and how to nurse it and send them home. And, self-care with rest as the major thing. But as a performer, we'd have to think about what are the needs of the show. Can we afford to lose this performer who's just sprained his ankle? Are they the only person that can do that role? And how unsafe is it for me to tape him up real good, put him in the show just so that act can still run? So in a performance industry, you have to think more in terms of balancing what is safe and still try to deliver as much as you can for the audience to get the best experience. So I was very aware that, my decision would directly impact on the show, whether or not someone's in and out of the show, whether they were the best performer for that act, but if they were injured, first of all, we take their safety into consideration. That's the utmost important thing that we worry about. But then the second thing is, we think about, is it medically safe to put them on? We discuss with the artists to see how well or ready they feel to be put on still with a small injury. For sure, if it was a major injury, if something was torn, they get pulled out straight away and get booked in to see a surgeon, right? So it depends on the extent of the injury and how much we can kind of tread on those borderlines. And we work together as a team. So it's not just all the physio's decision, but we have to work with the artist. And then we also have to work with a wider team with stage management to see who else is in, who else can do this role. And of course, with coaching, as the artist is being rehabilitated, we talk about the rehab plan. How much can they do now? It's been 3 weeks since they've sustained this injury. How much more can they do? Can they go back on bungee? Can they go back to diving? Whatever it is. So communication between departments, across departments, are also important. And I think the injuries that would make me the most stressed would often be the injuries that happen mid-show, because you didn't have time to think about it. And when the show is going on and someone's injured and they kind of hobble into physio saying they're hurt, first thing is we have to communicate on radio to say this person's presented. We have to assess him, give us some time. And then we just really have to be as quick as we can, as efficient as we can to diagnose, come up with a plan, let everyone know, okay, this is the plan, they're in or out, or maybe they're partly in and they can do only X, Y, Z, but not A, B, C. And then that communication over the radio would be received by the whole team. And then that would just lead to a whole cascade of events where it could be like, wardrobe would suddenly have to run and get somebody else's costume, go preset it somewhere. Everything happens in a very quick, dynamic way. But for me, that would usually be the highest stress time, because everyone's waiting for you to assess, and you really want to make a good decision, the right decision, so you don't hurt that performer by saying, okay, I think you're fine, just go, or pull them out unnecessarily and they say, okay, we've got to cut that act now, and then the audience has a much lesser experience of the show. So yeah, I mean, we're not perfect, but we just try to do as much as we can given with the time and the resources that we have.
What would be your advice for an artist in terms of them having a long career in the performing arts industry in terms of their physical well-being? What would you advise somebody to do, or how to take care of themselves, or how much they commit to the show in terms of how much they do in each show, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have a sort of some recommendations?
Well, for sure, I'd have to say that they need to look after themselves, because there's a lot of performers and we can't look after all of them individually. So they need to be able to basically, maintain their bodies, whether it be doing exercises, the appropriate exercises, eating well, resting well. Usually as a performer of that level that can work in a large-scale show like that, they are already quite tuned in as to what they should be doing to take care of themselves. One thing that I find can be tricky for us is when people are not willing to come in, whether or not it, like what I said before, that it was because they were worried, the fear factor of not being offered a contract or being viewed as being the weaker person or the broken person. Or maybe there would just be some people who were quite stubborn, thinking that, no, I don't need you, I can fix myself. And I think the second type of people could be more dangerous, because they can be in pain. They might not tell us. They might not even come and say, I need to be out, until they actually break something. So I think to have a long career, I would advise performers not to, be all too tough, because when they're too tough, sometimes they can really hurt themselves or have lots of degeneration before they know it, and then it's too late. So I would say always be open, come chat with us. You might not need physio, you might not need help, you might not need to see a doctor, but if you come and chat with us, we can talk with you, we can reason with you. If you don't believe us, we often pull up stuff on Google to be like, see, this is what we're telling you about. See, it's actually on Google, so it must be true, right? So at least have that conversation, so that it's a mutual kind of decision that's made, whether or not it be someone should start seeing a doctor, whether somebody needs a PRP injection. That those wider decision making has to start from somewhere. So if they don't initially start that communication, we can't help them. And the most dangerous thing is if they tough it out until the end, then they can actually really be worse off, and that injury could be career ending. So if you want a long-term career, you need to be open, talk to us. If you don't like what we're saying, we can refer you to the medical doctor, we can refer you to an orthopedic surgeon, and just making sure that the company know at what physical level you are is actually good for you, because then we can make sure that we give you the right training load, the right show load, so as not to hurt you, because when somebody's hurt and out for 9 months, it's actually more work for all the other people that have to work in the place of him. So it's not just that one person's problem, it becomes a wider problem for the team. So I think, again, it goes back to communication, talking with us, finding the best solution together, and yeah, go from there.
And now a note from our sponsor. The Theatre Out Live podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearCom. ClearCom is the leader in voice communications since 1968 for theatre and the performing arts. When the show must go on, ClearCom is there to keep the team on cue. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out.
Did you ever get to see any technicians, or are any familiar with injuries on technicians?
Oh, yes. There were lots of technicians that actually needed physio, but when I was the physio for the show, we didn't have the time, or we didn't have the mandate to treat them. Because if we started treating one technician, then there would be no time for artists, because then all the technicians would expect us to treat them. So for that particular show, we were only dedicated to artists. So that meant that the technicians could only be treated if it was something that was very major, very serious, and needed immediate, attention. The general aches and pains, niggles, we would send them off to the local physios in private clinics, because they had really good insurance coverage. The artist needed our time in-house. But we would not mind giving, backstage advice. It's like, okay, I've got this problem, what do you think it is? What do you think I should do? So just conversational advice we would give, but actual treatment, like lie on the bed, do a proper treatment, not so often. Only if that person, couldn't work, or it was an emergency, there was a first aid thing, or we must attend to those kind of things, right? Yeah, but regular treatments, we generally outsource for the technicians.
It's interesting that you say that, Anna, because it does beg the question. Like, if you look at the scuba divers in the show, their roles are just as physical as the performers, and maybe the carpentry and rigging teams too, right? So one could question, just because the people are not on stage doesn't mean they shouldn't receive physio treatment.
Oh,
I mean,
no
it's
doubt.
something that should be re-questioned. I'm really just rethinking it in my mind right now. I was like, hang on a second. Why don't we have an extra couple of physios and
totally
service
agree
that
with
as
you.
well?
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's just manpower and the number of people that we had and the ratio of us to performers, because I guess performers take priority because they're working on stage, they're physical. Scuba divers, you can say as well, but probably they have more of a team to switch out. So, maybe more people can do that one role, but for performers, maybe one person can only do one role. So it would be highly inconvenient if that one person was out because we didn't have time to treat them. So I guess that's why they prioritize the performers. And when I was hired, the job mandate was to treat performers only. So that's why we only did that. But I think if there was unlimited budget, for sure, they should have a separate team of physios only servicing technicians. There is no question about that. I feel like, the amount of work that the technicians put in, physical labor as well, you could say it's the same, if not more so. They work long hours as well. They push heavy objects. Sometimes they do repeated manual labor. So that's why when I actually left the show, I went into private practice and I received a lot of these technicians at my clinic. And immediately, that gave me a lot of business in the beginning because they thought, oh, wow, finally we can see you. And I guess the company is fair in a way that they looked after the technicians by giving them a good insurance package. So at the same time, it wasn't like they didn't get any help at all. So they were reimbursed for physio and they could come and see me off duty. So, you could say performers were probably more privileged, of course. They worked less if you looked at the physical number of hours or the how much of the time are they actually working, or they do one training, but then they can just sit in the dressing room and chill and chat. But then again, it's like this person just flipped a motorbike, It's like the amount of skill that they have probably allows them to be a little bit spoiled, I guess, because these talents that you get from all over the world is not easy to find. So I guess the company prioritizes the resources towards them. But yeah, no doubt, like if there was unlimited resources, I totally feel that there should be a separate department for physio for the technicians as well.
I'm going to try and argue for that next time, I think.
When you treat the technicians in your private practice, was there a recurring theme, let's say, on what you were, or it was like a little bit of everything?
It could be actually quite specific to each department, So let's say wardrobe people could often have neck injuries because they would always look down and be sewing and doing stuff. So it was specific to the nature of their jobs. Rigging people, carpentry people would have more manual handling issues like back pains or knee pains. And there was a trend, but it was never exclusive to a particular department. So the general musculoskeletal things, it would happen to anybody. If somebody kind of had a near miss and they tripped, that could happen to anybody in any department. So I guess me being there outside of the actual show for a little while, it was actually quite good to actually see the show from the other side. Because when I worked in the show, I was only understanding the artistic side of things because we only dealt with the artistic component of the show, the performance, coaching, stage management, physio, and we didn't really understand the technician's life much. And I actually believe that I knew more about the show after having left the show, working as a physio in private practice, because I had a lot more time talking to the technicians and understanding their work, what they did, how they had to do it, why did your finger get caught in that, and then that kind of stuff. So you really I felt that I had a really good all-rounded experience of the show, just because I actually had the fortunate chance to actually treat people from both sides.
So you'd say either a bigger team or a very good insurance for technicians.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the insurance plan that they had was really good, but I don't know if there was another show here or anywhere else in the world, whether or not it'd be the same insurance, because for sure, anyone that works on a show can be highly strung. I'm not saying everybody is, but the demands of the show, often it comes before anybody's personal needs, because it's a big picture thing. You work together. It's like, oh, I want to sleep in today. It's like, no, you can't. Suddenly, this person is out. You need to come in for training early. You get a call early in the morning, even if this performer has had a big night out, you're a team player. So everything was worked around the show. And so everyone just kind of had to make those sacrifices. And I know a lot of technicians, not just performers, who would actually go into work with a small injury, with pains, because they know they were important, they were needed in that role. So, I can say that there were a lot of team players that I worked with, and, I was very lucky to actually have known them on a personal level, because with my job, I actually have to know them very well as a person. What do you do for an exercise? What are your hobbies? How is your posture at home? Do you like watching Netflix lying on your side all the time? That's why you've got a neck problem, and then we get talking about, regular life stuff. How many kids do you have? Do you carry them? How old are they? Do you put them on your shoulders? So I feel like that closeness, of getting to know people as individuals, as a physio, for me is a true gift. For me.
You recently joined me in Saudi Arabia for the project Terhal. Tell us about your experience there. What was it like for you?
Well, to be honest, before you called me about the job, I had no inclination to go to the Middle East. Well, not because I avoided it or anything. It was just like there were many other places on my travel list that I wanted to go to. So out of the blue, Middle East, like what? Not even just to visit. It was like to work there. So I thought, okay, that sounds cool. And, Macau had just opened up from 3 years of being locked down in COVID. It was a nice little surprise, thinking, what? Can I actually travel now without coming back and quarantining? So that was a huge appeal. And I said yes pretty much as soon as I had the okay from my husband and my boss here in Macau. And then I started doing my research. And not until after I started doing my research, then I discovered it's actually quite scary, or can be a bit scary. Oh, actually being a woman, how would it be working with a team there, especially being a woman leader in Saudi Arabia? So I kind of got very excited in the beginning. And then I got a bit worried after I started doing my research. And then, when I actually got there, I realized all my little worries about, how should I dress? Or is it appropriate to shake the guy's hand if he picks me up from the airport? Those kind of little things kind of just dissolved away once I got there. So being in Saudi Arabia really opened my eyes to a culture that I had never studied. I'd never actually worked with anyone that came from that culture that had a very strong, how would you say, cultural inclination. Because everyone that I worked with in Macau, they could have been from the Middle East, but they had probably traveled the world and see eye to eye with a Westerner and accepted everything that a Western person or a Chinese person would accept. Like, they're just more worldly. But walking into the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, for me, after having done my research, I thought, well, I better be careful, about things I say, the things I wear, or talking to people, expecting that they hold certain values that I hold myself, because it's such a different world. But it was quite an eye-opening experience, and a surprise to me that they were much more worldly, much more open-minded, much more humorous than I thought they were. On the internet, you go, oh my God, everything's so serious there. Oh my God. But when you get there, everyone could take a joke. Everyone was nice. Everyone was kind. And the team that I led, they were very, very well receptive of me, and very, very nice. Culturally, I had the experience of actually being able to go to one of their homes and have a family meal on the ground, eating with my hands. That was the last thing I expected on this job. But I really felt that these people were nice, kind, genuine people that have not had much exposure to the world. Or maybe I was the ignorant one that never read into their culture or knew about their culture. But yeah, it was very new for me, this whole experience. And I could say that I'm very pleasantly surprised by the amount of work that the people were able to put in, the number of hours that they were ready to work, because, we had a very limited time to put on that huge, massive show. And I would say all the Saudi people, the local people, and also the expats, anyone that I worked with on that team was very dedicated. So the Ministry of Culture, I think they found the right people to do that job, because, looking at how successful it was, everyone was blown away by it, the locals. I think I looked at one of the girls that was in my team. She was in her early 20s, with a few years of experience in a clinic. And I just kind of looked at her thinking, she's just like me, she's in Saudi Arabia, and this is the first show of its kind that's opened up in her hometown, and her eyes were, just how would you say, glistening, like to everything that she saw. And I'm like, that must have been me, like more than 10 years ago, when House of Dancing Water opened. So it was kind of cool to kind of see, the same experience happen to new young people, new young physios who were super passionate, super curious, super eager to learn, super hardworking. And, the whole end result, made them all proud, made their families proud, and just wowed the whole community.
That's so beautiful.
Cool. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that story about your experience in Saudi Arabia. It's we'd never actually caught up about that, Jacinta. So it's nice to hear that. We always finish our podcast with the two same questions, so we're going to ask them now. What is your most favorite thing about your job or the industry?
For doing what I do as a physio in musculoskeletal and private practice, I would say it's the ability to actually be with people, to communicate with people and be helpful to them as an individual. Because, I wanted to do something that was medical because I wanted to help people. I like talking to people, listening to people. In general, as a physio, you could actually do a lot of things. See, there are some physios that sit in an office and do paperwork for insurance companies, and they don't have to see anybody. You talk to anybody all day. But for me in particular, for my profession, doing what I do every day, I'm really grateful for the fact that I can actually get to know people as individuals, get to know them and help them with their problems. And once you're able to help someone improve their quality of life, let's say there was a lady with a frozen shoulder, she couldn't reach her hand up to wash her hair, highly inconvenient for her. When she's able to do that again, I feel so happy because of me that she was able to make such a huge difference to her life. So those little things, or even major things like sports stuff, people couldn't play football because they broke something, they had surgery, and they come to me, and then I rehab them, and then they're better, and then months later they're on the soccer field again. So those little things, those little things that make people's lives better because of me, that makes me feel very happy. That gives me the best job satisfaction ever. I think that's the best thing of my job, and that's why I go to work every day, because I look forward to helping those people.
And if you could change one thing about your job or the industry, what would you change?
As an industry, I don't know. I can only speak for myself in the small little sector that I work in, because, again, like I said, there's physios that work in pediatrics, geriatrics, stroke units, hospitals, ICUs, it's been long gone since I've, touched on those very specific sides. But for me, working in private practice, I mean, it's unrealistic, but I wish I had, more hands and more time. And so I could, treat everyone at the times that they wanted, because often you'd see a pattern of, people wanting treatment at particular hours, say after school, after work, on the weekends. But, there's only one of me, and, you can't split yourself to help that many people because they all want the help at that particular time or around that particular time. Like, you can't ask someone who's a teacher at school to come at 11:30 a.m. in the morning because you have a spot, right? So I kind of struggle with that. I think that's the only frustration in my job most of the time, because it's like, oh, I wish I could have seen them twice this week, but they only have time for once. Or, oh, there's a schedule clash. And instead of me being able to see them once this week or twice this week so we can keep the treatment process going forwards and not actually regressing because they haven't seen me for 2 weeks because they have to go for a business trip, those kind of things are the things that frustrates me. But there's nothing one can do about it, right? Yeah, so I don't think I've really answered your question, but honestly, like, that is the first thing that came to my mind.
When we figure out how to clone people, and then you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think so.
Or you get an AI robot or something going next to you to do the extra, give you the extra hands, right? It's not too distant.
Or clone the teacher so that the clone can still be teaching, and then the one that's injured can come and get treatment.
Exactly.
Clone other people as well.
Jacinta, thank you so much for joining us on the Theatre Art Life podcast. I really, truly appreciate hearing you about your work and your life, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Anna. It was a pleasure talking to you both.